I have, and I want to thank Makiba Foster for the invitation to come to Fort Lauderdale to be out of the middle of the country in the summertime, and to be here on the water. So I wear my fancy red shoes. With that said, I have a new book called Faith and Struggle in the Lives of Four African Americans. Ethel Waters, a woman named Mary Lou Williams, who's a jazz composer, Eldridge Cleaver, and Muhammad Ali. I wrote a book about these four figures because oftentimes people think that religion in the lives of African Americans is somehow monolithic, that is somehow that African Americans are all Protestant, that they don't think about complex thoughts because they are religious. And this is particularly true in my academic circles where I live and reside. That somehow, if you think about religion, you're not thinking about class solidarity or struggle or the economic implications of something. But actually, black folks think about a lot of things, and they use religion in a lot of different kinds of ways. And so when I was conceiving this book, I had to say, first of all, I'm thinking about these four individuals. Now, Ethel Waters, and for many of you all, especially young people, she was Beyonce before Beyonce. And I mean that. She was first for a black-owned record company, Black Swan Records, recorded a song called Stormy Weather. And most people associate that with Lena Horne. But the first person to record that was Ethel Waters. Ethel Waters not only recorded that song, she took up the stage. And throughout the 1930s, she was making like $3,000 a month in the Depression era. And she appeared in films, and she was the second black woman to be nominated for an Academy Award. So that's pretty good stuff. I encountered Ethel Waters as a kid. I grew up till I was 14 in the city of New Orleans, right? And so, as a kid, my grandmother made me watch religious television. And what was religious television back in my day when dinosaurs still roamed were only two shows. There was Billy Graham and a Catholic bishop named Bishop Fulton Sheen. Those were the two shows. And my grandmother was a devout Baptist, and I would always wonder why we were watching a Catholic bishop, but she thought it was good religious TV, it would make me moral. And be unlike my uncles, she would say. Right? And we would watch Billy Graham. And the first time I encountered Ethel Waters is she's the opening for Billy Graham. And I wondered as a kid, in my Huey Freeman kind of way, y'all know Huey Freeman from the Boondocks. Maybe some of y'all do, some of you don't. But if you ever watched the Boondocks or read the cartoon, there's this young, radical little boy, Huey Freeman. And I was thinking like that, because all of this was about civil rights struggle going on outside. And Ethel Waters appeared to be some kind of throwback, because we watched Amos and Andy on reruns in New Orleans. And it was actually a very funny show. And those actors were tremendous, right? So I'm thinking that this woman, so years later, I'm reading the New York Times magazine, and a black woman writer, Margot Jefferson, writes this interesting paragraph about Ethel Waters. She said, Ethel Waters was a notorious lesbian. And my head spin on its axis, right? Because I'm like, is this the woman my grandmother wanted me to know about and watch Billy Graham? So I started out this book trying to explore Ethel Waters' own interesting religious journey. And it turned out she wrote two memoirs. And the first one is called His Eyes on the Sparrow. That's the song she always sang. And the other one, It's Wonderful to Me. And so I started reading it, and I was like, I'm a historian, I'm trained as a historian. I'm going to the archives, I'm going to go out to dig up what I can find. So I write the Billy Graham archives. I want to know what the conversations are between Graham and her and other things. So that's what I set out to do. And then I said, well, if Ethel Waters is complex about her own religious journey, then what about some other people? So I said, okay, in my mind, I'm going to take 2 women and 2 men, because men and women have some, contrasting kinds of views or some of the similar views. And I discovered the jazz composer, pianist, and if y'all never heard of it, you should look her up, Mary Lou Williams. I mean, we always give Duke Ellington, we give Count Basie, but Mary Lou is one of the great pianists, and she appears in there's a famous picture, y'all, about Harlem. All of the jazz musicians appear in front of this. It's a great day in Harlem, in the 1950s, in front of this brownstone. And there are 2 women in that thing. One is Mary McPartland, a white British jazz pianist, and Mary Lou Williams. She is, and the guys always say she played like a dude, right? I mean, no, she played like Mary Lou, and she was a prodigy, and she never got this credit. Now she's getting a lot more credit today than she ever got in her lifetime as being one of the great jazz musicians. She found herself in need in converting to Catholicism. So I was like, okay, I want to explore, well, why is Mary Lou converting to Catholicism? What is it about Catholicism that's so important for her life as opposed to what she grew up with roughly Black Baptist tradition out of Pittsburgh. So and I began to dig in her life and try to figure out what she have to say about her own journey, what was so important about it. At one point, she felt like she should quit being a jazz musician. And luckily for her, she had a black priest said, no, this is your gift from God. And Dizzy Gillespie saying, Mary Lou, you're going a little bit far. But she was trying to get fellow musicians off drugs. You remember in the 1950s, drug epidemics come and flow. In the 1950s, heroin tore up Harlem and went through the 70s, almost a 20-year run. And she feels it's our spiritual duty to get them off of drugs. But thank God for her priest, thank God for Dizzy Gillespie. She then says, I'm going to take my jazz to the Vatican. And she goes to the Vatican and she plays jazz. She says jazz is the blues, and this is the most deeply spiritual music you'll know. And of course, the pontiff, Pope Paul VI, they really don't know what to do with this jazz. The feeling and the soul of it. And of course, Alvin Ailey dancers take her up. If you ever go, you can go on YouTube and look up Mary Lou's Mass and see this great dance with them. So here was this woman trying to figure out her life, her journey, her struggle as a human being. She converts to Catholicism. So I said, I got to have an outlier in this group. I need somebody who's off the beaten path. So I take Eldridge Cleaver. Anybody know about Eldridge Cleaver? Some of y'all was alive when Eldridge was around. Right? Eldridge Cleaver wrote a book that I wish I could say it sold 2 million copies. It literally sold 2 million copies. Soul on Ice in the 1960s, 69. It sold 2 million copies. And he was a prisoner. And Eldridge is the, when you go research people, some people leave you want to drink. And Eldridge always left me like, I need a stiff one after this. And I'm not a hard drinking person. I just need something, because he's very complicated. He was one of these kids. He got put in jail in the late 50s. Why? Selling weed. The judge threw the book at him. Right? Selling pot. Lots of young people sold pot in the 50s, believe it or not. And he spends a better part of his adult formation in jail. He's so angry at the society and the world, Eldridge turns to becoming a rapist. Practices on black women. It's all true. and then he rapes white women, so he gets even more time. He's in tough prisons like San Quentin in California. But he discovers in prison that he can write, and he can think. And he discovers also, like many prisoners of his era, Malcolm X. And so he begins to write and put his words in the thought, and he is getting censored by the prison, but he gets a lawyer, Beverly Axelrod of San Francisco, to defend him, and he puts together this book that will eventually be called Soul on Ice, about his prison experience. Now, I teach a course on black men, so I'm always interested in trying to get my students to think about what are the terms of masculinity that many black men feel. And so I was thinking, well, maybe I should use Soul on Ice because it's a period piece. It came out at a certain time. And I went back to reread the book. And in it, I was shocked how much about religion Eldridge is talking about. And of course, Eldridge is then, after he gets out of prison, he becomes a member. He was first a member of the Nation of Islam in prison. When Malcolm X is assassinated, he is totally devastated and feels betrayed. When he comes out of prison, he joins. He's a journalist. He writes for a magazine, a Catholic magazine called Rampart, and he starts writing. His book gets published, and he becomes a celebrity in through the Black Panther Party. He becomes their minister of information. And he does this 2 or 3 days after Dr. King is assassinated. So I wanted to explore his life, because when he is put in exile with his wife Kathleen Cleaver. And if you go back and look at the pictures from that era, you see Eldridge and Kathleen, they're the kind of black power couple everybody shot. She light-skinned with the big afro, you know. Eldridge is older than she is. He's born in 38. She's born in like the late 40s, about 10, 12 years older than she is. But they look like the black power couple, and they're a celebrity, but they're in exile. And Eldridge wants to come home. He feels alienated in France or in other places that they've been exiled. They've been in Cuba, they've been in France, Algeria, and then Paris. And he comes home, and he has a conversion, or so we think. And that is, he becomes this evangelical, and he becomes this right-wing evangelical. And so I wanted to trace his life and follow his path and see what he was saying about religion, how he thought about religion. Even if you don't think his conversion experience was authentic, I wanted to see how he thought about his own journey. And of course, finally, I wanted to see Muhammad Ali, because we all talk about Ali as this famous resistant to the war in Vietnam, but we don't put him in context. His resistance was about his journey being in the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam, of course, had a cosmology that, what I mean is a worldview, a kind of where white people were the devil, right? So you imagine the Supreme Court justice trying to rule on Ali's case, right? Freedom of religion. But this dude is faced saying we the devil, right? All the white men up there trying to rule on his case, you the devil. So they ruled on the technicality. And this is absolutely clear in Muhammad Ali's case, which was the right decision to make. I mean, he had every right. But I wanted to trace what was it like for this young man as a young convert. And what I discovered in that, as I read all of the period pieces from that, is that in the United States, Ali really is the predecessor to Islamophobia. Because if you read and I read Sports Illustrated. One of my grad students gave me, he had been collecting all these old Sports Illustrated, he's all digitally inclined, and gave me a bunch of stuff, and said, like, Doc, read this, read that. And I'm like, okay. And as I read through it, I realized that Sports Illustrated wrote things like Ali, Cassius Clay, and the Mystery of Islam. Even Floyd Patterson wrote a pretty scathing article. Some people think Floyd was used, but Floyd Patterson, one of the people he fights, converts to Catholicism. Lots of black people converted to Catholicism in the 1950s and 60s. In fact, there are more black Catholics than there are AMEs. It's just for y'all to know. I mean, now there's still more Baptists and Pentecostals than they are in any of those, but just the sheer, so Ali and Floyd Patterson are bringing a fight that started somewhere in some European country called the Crusades about a boxing match. They're bringing it in the ring. So as a writer, as a thinker, I'm trying to lift these up off the page and think about how Ali thought about his own faith journey. What was so important about his name that he pummeled somebody? What was so important about his struggle? And I just didn't want to write about Ali as this heroic figure. I wanted to also write about Ali the man, right? So Islam has certain teachings about marriage. Ali was terrible at it, right? And he was prudish. So in a sport, it's kind of ironic to me, in a sports where you take off most of your clothes and your body's bare, but then you're kind of prudish about religion and how he viewed women. So I wanted to get that it was complicated. And what was even more complicated was the people surrounding him were a diversity of religion. For instance, his hype man, Drew Bondini Brown, people might seem like, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, champ, he was a Reformed Jew. His manager, Angelo Dundee, Italian, Catholic. So I'm trying to, how do we think about all of these things? The only place I go where besides church or other places where religion is often talked about is my barbershop. The great theological debates of all time are held in the barbershop, right? And so I wanted to think that people think about their faith outside of the clerical people, right? The theologians, the preachers, right? People think about their faith in ways that are much more complicated. And I should have known this from my own grandparents.